Welcome to Finlos Lives. A few weeks back, I mentioned that I would be posting an episode with the novelty of me being interviewed by Eva. A flip of the script, so to speak. I'm excited for any opportunity to record with Eva, but I was actually nervous about me being the subject of the episode. There's a reason why I'm the host usually. Despite my uneasiness, it was a fun and cathartic time spent together. But when I went to listen and begin the editing process for the nearly 2 hours of recorded audio, I was horrified to find that the SD card where the files were stored was corrupted. Every other file on the card was accessible. Only that one folder that contained our 2 mic feeds was glitched, of course. I researched and tried every technical fix I could, all the way down to the DOS command level. I was finally able to access the specific folder where the recordings should have been saved, but there were no files there. I used data recovery tools, I used multiple computers, all without success. But honestly, the hardest part was telling Eva that the time and work that they had put into preparing and recording was gone. They were disappointed, as they had put a lot of effort and intentionality into the process. I was disappointed too, because I was not going to ask Eva to try to redo the recording. Can't just recreate the vibe of a conversation, and I didn't think it would have the same effect or quality to record about the same topic, but with different questions. And just like that, my routine around recording and editing was broken. Until this episode, it had been 3 weeks since I'd written, recorded, or edited any content for the podcast, and it hasn't been for lack of wanting to do so or a shortage of ideas necessarily. But every time I sat down to begin, something else came up, or I found an excuse to put it off, or I thought about that lost episode and grew frustrated and walked away. I think that there's a few things at play here, and some of this is sort of a way for me to cover some of the content that Eva and I discussed. But I have a completely different schedule around work now. I left my teaching position and started a new job a couple weeks ago. Teaching has been one of the pillars of my identity for 17 years, and I am still coming to grips with what it means not to be in the classroom. This past week would have been pre-planning week for me, and it was an interesting experience to read all the posts from my former co-workers about the back-to-school excitement, and dread too. I even received the annual welcome back letter from my former principal because I guess that I haven't completely been purged from their mailing lists yet. While I am certain of my decision to shift my career, happy in my new job, I would be lying if I said that I didn't have some strong lingering feelings of longing for that excitement of meeting new students, and even guilt for not completing the journey with that last class of rising seniors. Eva is very perceptive. It's a main reason why they are such an effective therapist, reliable friend, and amazing partner. They knew that there were emotional currents surrounding my decision that I was not processing fully, and I'm usually not one to unpack those things out loud without some prodding. So they said that they wanted to sit in the interviewer's chair for an episode of Finlos Teaches, with me as the guest, to discuss current issues in education and why I came to the decision to break from the teaching profession, but also so that I could productively engage with those feelings of sadness, guilt, and excitement too. It was an amazing conversation, with laughter and tears. I am sad that you won't get to hear it as it was intended, and that frustration, I think, has been getting in the way of me working on new material. And sensibly enough, so has starting a new job. I am now a fully remote worker, so all my work time is spent at a computer. Also, because the job is still new, because it's still been summer break for the kids, and because everything is still in flux, I haven't yet worked out when creative pursuits will fit into my days, and how and what that will look like. But mostly, I think I've been trying to reconceptualize this new version of myself. It's an uncommon opportunity that I have to both get to start something new that both utilizes the skills and experiences that I've had to at this point, while offering entirely new instances for growth and attainment. And I need to remember that I am still a teacher. I will always be a teacher, and a great one at that. But I have the chance to redraw some boundaries between work and personal life, and to use a little less energy on classes and a little more on nurturing myself and my family. I think Eva and I will come back to address a few of the topics that we covered in that original conversation, albeit in different contexts. But really, that conversation was a chance for me to feel into this transition, and that purpose was met, even if the recording is lost. Here's to the next phase. As the new school year begins soon, I want to wish all my educator family the best in the coming days and weeks. I wonder what concerns are coming up as you try to make space for new and uncomfortable policies in your practices. I wonder what ways you are devising to ensure that you are supporting all your students while making sure to take care of yourselves. I wonder what you are most excited for and what has been most surprising. Much of the news surrounding education has focused on the ongoing teacher shortage and controversial and vague rule implementations. And like so many times before, the working teachers get lost in the push and pull between the interests of parents and politicians. As always, you will do what is best for your students, for their academic success and mental health. You are seen. I hope to have a few educators on the show in the coming weeks to get their insights on the school year's progress. And now for what we've been watching. Eva and I recently finished Season 1 of The Wheel of Time on Amazon Prime. This series first aired at the end of last year, and I think we started near the time it was released. I remember pressing play and stopping the show within the first few minutes and moving on to more interesting looking shows. On this go around, I had the same urge to stop the show just minutes in, and I'll try to suss out my reasons why, and also what kept us watching this time. Like so many other series, this one is trying to capitalize on the popularity of HBO's Game of Thrones fantasy milieu and the relative popularity of the Wheel of Time book series by Robert Jordan, with Brandon Sanderson finishing the series after Jordan's death. In all, there are some 14 volumes in the main book series with several companion books and prequels, so Amazon has plenty of content to pull from. And unlike Game of Thrones, should the producers decide to lean into the book's content, it has already been completed, so there shouldn't be as much controversy around a messy ending that may or may not line up with an author's intent. That is, of course, unless, like so many other programs on streaming platforms, it gets cancelled. I'm looking at you, Netflix. I read the first book in the series about 15 years ago and found it interesting enough to begin the second in the series. I then quickly lost steam, put the book down, and forgot about it. A few months later, I picked it up again to try to work through the series and found that I had lost most of the characters, their motives, or any sense of care for anything that was happening. I realized that while the writing of the book was fine, the story itself was boring. It's hard to have a sense of urgency or for characters to feel they have choices or agency when so much is operating under the premise of fate or destiny. As such, the plot just plodded along. People went places and did things, and that's about all I can remember. Except that I was always having the sensation that I had read something just like it before, or that some narrative element had been borrowed. Also, while the fantasy genre is notorious for its hefty page counts and series extending for volumes on end, I felt that things were just unnecessarily long and convoluted. Yes, it's world building. Yes, there are races and myths and cultures that need to be introduced, explained, and contextualized. I get it. Jordan was just unsuccessful at making me care. And so for me at least, the show carries with it a lot of this baggage. It also doesn't help that as this show is available, Amazon is simultaneously advertising for its other fantasy series, Rings of Power, which takes place in Middle-earth with a very established lore thanks to a set of books beloved by generations and a trilogy of Academy Award-winning films. Just judging from its trailers, it's obvious that Amazon has more faith in this latter adaptation based on special effects, set, and costume design budgets alone. But back to the opening sequence of The Wheel of Time. It feels incredibly generic and somewhat cheap. There's a cut and pasted sweeping camera chase, the requisite fancy fantasy costumes, and an obvious lack of trust in the story, yielding an overdependence on fair to middling action. And while on this go-around we did sit through the entire first season, it's not until halfway through that the show actually allows for any time to care about what is happening to the core characters. Just like the book, There is a sense of people being carried off to a destined end without much courtesy for a sense of stakes or even a reason. Yes, there is a violent attack from this world's version of trolls called Trollocs, and here the effects and action are actually decent. And we are introduced to the power of the Aes Sedai, the female power brokers in this story. Then we learn that this story's chosen one is actually a potential chosen 4 or 5, and we're off on a chase. Listen, I wasn't a fan of what I read from the books, so I wasn't really expecting much. But the show does have some interesting narrative beats throughout its first season of 8 episodes. A problem the show has that it shares with its source material is that it has to follow so many character arcs in such a brief amount of time that no one person is allowed to really show much growth. At least Moiraine, the primary Aes Sedai that we meet who is gathering our band of potential dragons reborn, has some interesting backstory and relationships that are explored in the latter episodes. And this presents one of the opportunities that the show took to deviate from its source material, and that's the strength of its female cast. Each actor is very successful at filling their scenes with strength and charisma, oftentimes even more than their male counterparts. Another strength of the casting is that not only is this an incredibly diverse cast for a traditionally white genre of entertainment, but this might be one of the most diverse casts of any production I have seen. And best of all, it isn't only limited to secondary or background characters. If memory serves, more than half of the primary cast is non-white. One final thing the show smartly does is to keep the pacing quick. Fans of the book may lament the loss of some of the finer details of the lore, but even with the breakneck pace of the second half of the 8 available episodes, the first few were still dangerously close to boring, or simply bogged down with too many potential plot elements. With the show now established, I actually look forward to the news that while the announced second and third seasons will not contain more than the current model of 8 episodes, each episode will have slightly longer run times. That's closer to the hour mark with change, not the 2+ hour long behemoth that was the Stranger Things Season 4 closer. To wrap up, if I could talk to the producers of the show, I'd tell them to trust their writers and actors to make the show interesting and stop trying to wow me with pretty costumes and special effects. By the final 2 or 3 episodes, when the frayed plot threads wound themselves back together, I was invested enough in the characters to want to see where it all was going, even if I already knew from my long ago read of the book. I do kinda sorta definitely wish they had followed through with their tease of potentially having the dragon reborn be a woman, and a woman of color at that. But some white male fantasy tropes persist, I suppose. That's it for this episode. If you have any comments, suggestions, or questions, please send them my way to finloslives@gmail.com or on social media. You can also leave me a voicemail message at finloslives.com via the SpeakPipe widget. I would love to hear from you. Thanks for joining me for this episode. I look forward to next time and seeing where the conversation takes us.